In the final winter of World War II, a single photograph sparked global outrage, showing American soldiers as torturers, not liberators. Nations froze in disbelief. Allies questioned trust. But behind those haunting images lay a secret so powerful it could rewrite the truth of the entire war. Winter 1944. Across a war-torn Europe, the airwaves crackle with static and fear. Then, out of the cold hum of a Berlin radio transmission, comes a voice that will shake the moral ground of nations. The German propaganda ministry announces that new evidence has surfaced. Evidence that the American army has descended into barbarism. Photographs, the voice claims, show captured Wehrmacht officers strapped to devices that look like relics of the Spanish Inquisition. The broadcast is chillingly specific. Iron frames, wired chairs, dark chambers filled with unrecognizable machinery. The announcer's tone is measured, almost scholarly, as if describing a discovery rather than an accusation. Within hours, the images appear across neutral Europe, on front pages in Zurich, Stockholm, and Madrid. The pictures are grainy, poorly lit, and haunting. To the untrained eye, they seem to confirm the story. American soldiers torturing prisoners using medieval methods. The world is stunned. Neutral journalists begin asking dangerous questions. Could the Allies, the self-declared defenders of civilization, be guilty of the very cruelty they condemn? In Bern, Swiss editors print headlines that blur fact and fiction. American interrogations mirror the Inquisition. In Sweden, respected columnists demand an international inquiry. Even in Lisbon, where neutrality often meant silence, radio hosts ask what America is hiding. The propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, watches the reaction unfold with surgical precision. Every detail has been planned. His team releases the photographs in stages, one day at a time, to sustain the uproar. Each image is accompanied by new testimony, allegedly from escaped German prisoners. The narrative spreads like wildfire through cafe conversations and embassy corridors. By the third day, the story is impossible to ignore. Reporters in Switzerland contact the Red Cross. German representatives file formal complaints, accusing the United States of crimes against humanity. For the first time since the war began, America's moral standing is under question, not from the enemy's bullets, but from its words. Across the Atlantic, newspapers scramble to respond. The photographs look authentic. The faces of the supposed prisoners are obscured, but the uniforms, the lighting, the equipment, it all seems believable. Experts debate their origin. Were they staged? Were they stolen? Or was there a horrifying truth hidden somewhere in Allied Europe? Inside Allied headquarters, the accusations cause immediate panic. For years, America has fought not just on the battlefield, but in the arena of ideas. The United States represents democracy, justice, and decency in a world collapsing into darkness. If these images are true, or even believed to be true, that foundation crumbles. The stakes couldn't be higher. Diplomats fear neutral nations might turn against the Allies. Humanitarian groups begin questioning the treatment of prisoners on both sides. Even Britain and France worry the scandal could fracture Allied unity. Germany's leaders seize the opportunity, claiming moral justification for their own brutal treatment of American captives. Within 72 hours, the propaganda has achieved its goal. Confusion. In Stockholm, the German attaché gives a press briefing. He claims the photographs were taken in a secret American camp somewhere in Belgium. The devices, he says, were modeled after instruments once used by inquisitors in Seville. The irony is not lost on his audience. Catholic Spain's Inquisition, reborn by Protestant America. It is a psychological masterstroke. In Washington, officials are stunned. They know of no such camp, no such equipment. Yet the more they deny it, the more convincing the story becomes. The world wants proof, not statements. And proof is what the Americans lack. The accusation begins to shape reality itself. Foreign editorials question America's commitment to the Geneva Convention. Neutral governments demand inspections. Even some Allied soldiers begin whispering doubts. If the photographs are genuine, what else might be true? The damage isn't just political, it's moral. The very foundation of America's war effort depends on the belief that it is the better side, the savior of freedom, not the imitator of tyranny. And now, that belief trembles. In Berlin, Goebbels celebrates quietly. His plan has worked perfectly. He doesn't need the photographs to be genuine. He only needs the world to hesitate, to wonder if America might not be as innocent as it claims. Doubt, he knows, spreads faster than truth. What no one outside his ministry realizes is how carefully this story was built. The photographs were not random. They came from somewhere. They showed something. And behind their existence lies a deeper secret, one that neither Goebbels nor the Americans fully understand yet. Because buried in the details of those haunting images is a trace of something real. A place that officially doesn't exist. A facility known only to a handful of Allied officers. But for now, the world sees only the surface. A dark mirror reflecting its worst expectations. In the newspapers, the faces of American soldiers are printed beside captions of inquisitors. The public sees electric cables, chairs and straps, but not their purpose. Every wire looks like an instrument of suffering. Every shadow, an accusation. In war, perception is often stronger than truth. By the end of that week, the scandal has crossed oceans. In South America, pro-German stations broadcast the news as proof of American hypocrisy. In the Middle East, German agents distribute leaflets showing the photographs alongside images of medieval torture. The United States faces not a military threat, but a psychological one. A war of images and words. A single radio broadcast, born from a ministry of lies, has done what bombs could not. It has shaken the conscience of nations. And somewhere in Allied headquarters, orders are being written. Someone must uncover where these photographs came from, what they truly show, and who allowed them to reach Berlin. Because if America cannot prove its innocence, it risks losing more than the war. It risks losing its soul. At the Allied headquarters in France, a single name rises to the surface as the crisis deepens. Major Philip Brennan. He is 42 years old. A quiet man with the kind of eyes that seem to measure every word before it's spoken. Before the war, he was a professor of psychology at Columbia University. His lectures focused on human behavior under stress, how fear bends truth, how belief can overpower logic. When war erupted, his theories found a grim purpose. Now, those ideas will be tested in a way no textbook could ever prepare him for. In December 1944, Brennan is summoned to a small conference room inside the intelligence wing of the Supreme Allied Command. On the wall, pinned by brass tacks, are the same photographs that have set Europe ablaze. The images look ordinary at first glance. Metal chairs, unfamiliar devices, dark walls. But he knows what the world thinks they show. His orders are simple, yet impossible. Investigate these photographs, find their origin, and prove them false, or confirm the unthinkable. He has 10 days. For the Allied command, this is not just a matter of public relations. It's about survival. Neutral nations are threatening to suspend prisoner exchange programs. The Red Cross is demanding access to every American interrogation site. The German accusation has already begun to shape international policy. For Brennan, it's personal. His younger brother, Lieutenant Gerald Brennan, was a bomber pilot shot down over Germany 2 months ago. He was captured and interned in a German camp. Every day the propaganda spreads. Conditions for men like Gerald grow worse. Reports from Switzerland suggest that German guards have become more brutal, justifying their cruelty as retaliation for American tortures. Brennan knows that his investigation isn't just about clearing his country's name. It's about saving his brother's life. The clock is already ticking. Brennan starts by visiting 3 standard prisoner interrogation centers in northern France and Belgium. These are the facilities that handle captured German officers before they are transferred to Britain for extended questioning. He studies the rooms, the procedures, the instruments used. There is nothing out of place, no iron chairs, no medieval contraptions. The interrogators he observes follow strict guidelines. No coercion, no physical pressure, only strategic questioning. Yet, something doesn't add up. In his field notes, Brennan writes one sentence that will later define the case. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. At the second facility, outside Liège, he hears a quiet rumor from a French interpreter. The man mentions a special camp near the Belgian border, not officially recognized, high security, run by psychiatrists, not soldiers. The interpreter laughs it off as gossip, but Brennan's instincts flare. Back at headquarters, he cross-checks the official list of American interrogation sites. There's no record of any such location. Yet several intelligence reports reference information gathered from unlisted sources. Each time, the data is tagged with a vague location, somewhere near Verviers, Belgium. Brennan begins to see a pattern. When he confronts his superior, Colonel Archer, about the missing facility, he is met with silence. The colonel studies him for a moment, then simply says, "You're asking questions that don't exist, Major." And then, nothing more. That's when Brennan realizes this investigation runs deeper than propaganda. He turns his attention to the photographs themselves. Using light analysis and paper grain comparisons, he determines that they were developed using Allied standard photographic paper, not German stock. That means the photos were taken in Allied territory. The lighting, he observes, is consistent with portable flood lamps used by American military photographers. Whoever took them wasn't an enemy spy. They were on the inside. It's a chilling discovery. He now knows two things. The photographs were genuine, and they were taken somewhere under Allied control. But what they actually depict remains uncertain. Late one evening, Brennan locks himself in his temporary office and begins sorting through field reports, coded references, and shipment manifests. After hours of searching, he finds a single line buried in a logistics document. Special Psychological Unit. Equipment transfer to Camp K. Verviers Sector, Camp K. The name appears nowhere else in Allied records. But Brennan knows enough about military bureaucracy to recognize what that means. It's classified above his clearance level. For a moment, he considers dropping it. He could submit a report suggesting the photographs were fabricated, and no one would question him. But his conscience, and his brother's face in his memory, won't let him. He has seen what unchecked rumors can do to men's fates. If this camp exists, he has to see it. The next morning, he requests official transport to Belgium under the pretext of reviewing interrogation protocols. The request is quietly denied. That same night, he travels anyway, commandeering a jeep and a driver from the nearest motor pool. He knows it's risky, but he also knows time is running out. As they move through the winter fog, the war feels distant. The front lines have shifted east, yet the psychological battlefield has never been more alive. Brennan thinks about the irony. Words and images are now as powerful as tanks. Propaganda, once dismissed as mere noise, has become a weapon capable of reshaping entire nations' perceptions. Somewhere near Verviers, his driver points to a side road blocked by wire fencing. No signs, no guards visible, but beyond it, faint lights glow through the mist. Brennan studies the layout through binoculars. It looks like a standard military compound, except for one detail: no flag, no markings, no visible identification. It exists in silence. When they approach, two American sentries step out of the shadows. Brennan flashes his credentials. The guards exchange glances. Then one disappears into a nearby hut. Minutes later, a man in a gray overcoat appears and orders Brennan to wait. He does not introduce himself. He simply says, "You weren't cleared for this location." Brennan's answer is calm, almost detached. "Then clear me." The officer studies his badge again, hesitates, then waves him through. As the gate opens, Brennan steps into the unknown. Behind the fences lies the truth that could either save America's honor or destroy it entirely. Somewhere in this hidden compound, he will discover what those photographs truly captured. And when he does, the meaning of psychological warfare will change forever. January 1945. The war is nearing its end, but for Major Philip Brennan, it feels like something darker is only beginning. When he arrives at the compound outside Verviers, the cold is biting, and the silence is absolute. No movement, no insignias, no sound of training or vehicles. It feels like a facility that wants the world to forget it exists. A narrow dirt road leads him past 2 checkpoints and into a cluster of low buildings made of gray concrete. There are no flags, no unit designations, just numbers stenciled faintly on the walls. A small sign near the gate reads simply, Camp King. Brennan senses immediately that this is not a normal interrogation site. The guards are alert but not hostile. Their uniforms bear no divisional patches. Their silence speaks louder than any words. Inside, everything is orderly, almost clinical. He's led to a single-room office where a man in a white coat greets him not like a soldier, but like a scientist. Dr. Lawrence Fitch, psychiatrist, Johns Hopkins, civilian consultant to the U.S. Army. Fitch explains, in careful tones, that Camp King is not listed on any Allied registry for a reason. It was built for one purpose, to handle prisoners too important or too indoctrinated for ordinary questioning. Here, the Army is not just seeking information, it's trying to understand the mind that built Nazism itself. But what catches Brennan's attention most isn't the introduction. It's the equipment behind Fitch, the same devices seen in the German photographs. There they are, the metal frames, the wired chairs, the strange instruments that the world has mistaken for torture tools. Only now, up close, Brennan sees what the camera could not: precision engineering, not cruelty. The so-called restraints are fitted with sensors and small glass tubes. Wires run to monitors that hum quietly, recording heart rate, stress levels, and galvanic skin responses. Dr. Fitch notices Brennan's fixed stare. "You've seen the pictures," he says softly. "Then you know what the world thinks we are." Brennan nods, but his expression hardens. "And what are you really?" Fitch gestures toward a hallway. "Come and see." They walk past observation windows into a chamber filled with dim yellow light. A German officer sits alone, surrounded by devices that track every movement of his body. He isn't bound or harmed. He speaks slowly, eyes darting, while 2 observers take notes. Brennan realizes he's watching something entirely different from interrogation. It's therapy under the disguise of research. Dr. Fitch explains that Camp King is staffed by psychiatrists, linguists, and émigré scientists, many of them German Jewish refugees who fled the Reich. Their task? To understand how an entire generation of men was conditioned to follow orders without conscience. It's a secret war within the war. Fitch introduces Brennan to Dr. Hannah Vogel, a German-born psychologist who escaped Berlin in 1938 after the Nazis closed her university. She speaks with quiet conviction, explaining that what the world calls fanaticism is often a form of psychological programming. Hitler's regime didn't only control through violence, it rewired the human mind through repetition, isolation, and ritual. Dr. Vogel believes the process can be reversed. Her method, developed with Fitch's support, focuses on dismantling belief systems, not through pain, but through truth. The equipment Brennan saw in the photographs is part of that process. It measures the exact moment when denial breaks, when ideology begins to collapse under evidence. She shows Brennan a logbook. Inside are pages of physiological readings, heart rates, tremors, eye movements, recorded as former Nazi officers confront documentary footage of the concentration camps, footage they once believed to be Allied propaganda. Brennan feels an uneasy respect. He understands now that Camp King is not an interrogation center. It's a laboratory for the human conscience. Still, the question remains, how did these images reach Berlin? Dr. Fitch admits the existence of an internal photographer, someone assigned to document the process for scientific study. But all film reels were supposed to remain locked under military control. No copies authorized, no external distribution. The fact that photographs appeared in German propaganda means only one thing. Someone inside the system misunderstood what they saw. Before pressing further, Brennan studies one of the devices in detail. It resembles an iron frame with padded cuffs. In the photographs, it looked barbaric. In person, it's simply functional, meant to keep subjects still during stress analysis tests. Nearby, another device uses light and sound pulses to measure reflex speed. To outsiders, it could easily resemble an instrument of punishment. To scientists, it's just data collection. Dr. Vogel remarks quietly, "Fear sees what it expects to see." Brennan understands the truth of it instantly. The German propaganda machine didn't invent cruelty. It merely reflected its own. They looked at instruments of science and saw their own instruments of pain. He spends the next 2 days reviewing records and interviewing staff under strict secrecy. Every report confirms what he now believes. The program at Camp King isn't torture, it's transformation. Through psychological reconditioning, several Nazi officers have renounced their ideology, providing valuable intelligence about troop movements and defensive lines. One, a former SS strategist, even assisted the Allies in decoding regional command patterns. Brennan's skepticism turns to astonishment. He realizes the implications. Camp King has achieved what the battlefield could not. It's changing the enemy from within. But this discovery carries a dangerous paradox. If the truth about Camp King becomes public, it could undermine its mission. The Germans would immediately adapt, teaching their officers to resist psychological methods. And worse, neutral nations might never believe that such an operation could exist without cruelty. Before leaving, Brennan stands once more in the observation room, watching Dr. Vogel work with another prisoner. The man, an officer from the Waffen divisions, confesses that for years he believed himself chosen by destiny. Now, confronted with the facts, his voice trembles as he admits the truth. His ideology crumbles, replaced by silence. Brennan notes the moment in his report. The mind can be rebuilt when truth becomes undeniable. As he prepares to depart, Fitch hands him a sealed file marked "Confidential" for command eyes only. Inside are full details of Camp King's purpose, methods, and scientific findings. Brennan reads only the first line before closing it. Camp King represents the first applied field program in psychological deconditioning of totalitarian belief systems. Outside, snow begins to fall again. The compound fades into the mist as Brennan's jeep pulls away. The world still believes in the lie of torture chambers, yet within those walls, America is waging a battle of the mind, the most humane form of warfare ever conceived. He now understands what the propaganda truly threatens to destroy, not just America's image, but a scientific revolution in human understanding. The war for Europe may be ending, but the war for perception has only begun. Major Philip Brennan returns to Camp King the following morning. The air inside feels heavier now, not with suspicion, but with revelation. What he saw the night before lingers in his mind. The strange devices, the measured calm of Dr. Vogel, the transformation of men once consumed by fanaticism. The world outside calls this a torture camp. Inside, it feels more like a hospital for damaged minds. Dr. Hannah Vogel meets him in the main laboratory, a narrow hall lined with machines that hum softly, powered by generators running day and night. Her calm, deliberate tone carries the weight of someone who has studied both cruelty and conscience. She begins to explain what he witnessed. She tells Brennan that when she fled Germany in 1938, she carried more than fear with her. She carried understanding. As a researcher in Berlin, She had seen firsthand how the Nazi regime reshaped young minds, not through physical punishment, but through controlled repetition, reward systems, and carefully designed indoctrination rituals. Every poster, every anthem, every salute. It was all psychology disguised as patriotism. Totalitarianism, she says quietly, isn't just political. It's psychological. Her words stay with him. Dr. Vogel explains that Camp King's mission began when Allied intelligence realized that many captured officers weren't merely loyal, they were programmed. Standard interrogations failed because logic couldn't break through belief. Nazi officers didn't see themselves as prisoners. They saw themselves as the chosen, defenders of an ideology beyond defeat. Breaking that armor required something new, a science of unlearning. The devices in the room were built for that purpose. One resembles a narrow chair, surrounded by cables and tubes. In the photographs, it looked sinister. In truth, it is a biometric assessment station designed to measure stress responses during questioning. Small metal sensors record the subject's heartbeat, body temperature, and perspiration rate. The readings are not for punishment, but for understanding. The moment when a lie begins to collapse under pressure. Nearby, another machine displays faint electrical patterns on glass tubes filled with vapor. It tracks neural reactions to visual stimuli. When subjects view images of Nazi rallies or swastikas, their physiological responses reveal attachment and resistance. When they see footage of liberated towns and human suffering, the readings shift. The numbers on the display represent the silent war inside a human mind, the battle between indoctrination and truth. Brennan walks between the machines, realizing that every instrument once feared as a weapon is, in fact, a tool of empathy. None of this is about inflicting pain. It's about mapping belief. Dr. Vogel opens a small case filled with photographs, not of prisoners, but of data sheets, charts, and progression notes. Each record documents a journey from fanatic conviction to moral clarity. She explains the sequence that every subject passes through. The process begins with isolation. For 72 hours, no voices, no orders, no comrades. The goal isn't punishment, it's silence. Deprivation of reinforcement breaks the echo chamber of ideology. The prisoner is left alone with his thoughts, with no one to repeat the slogans that once gave him certainty. After isolation comes confrontation, not physical, but intellectual. The officers are shown factual evidence, documents, testimonies, photographs, and films captured by Allied forces. One by one, the myths they believed are dismantled. It's not the images themselves that create change. It's the slow erosion of denial. Then begins what Vogel calls cognitive disruption. Here, the scientists introduce conflicting truths. The subject must reconcile what he once believed with the reality now proven before him. The mind resists, then fractures. That moment, she says, is when real transformation begins. Brennan listens in silence. Every detail fascinates him. This isn't interrogation, it's psychological archaeology. The digging up of buried humanity beneath layers of indoctrination. Dr. Fitch joins them midway through the explanation. His tone is steady, clinical. He tells Brennan that they have already seen results far beyond expectation. 3 captured officers, 2 from the SS and 1 from the Abwehr, have completely renounced their allegiance to the Reich. Their testimonies have provided intelligence that helped the Allies predict German troop withdrawals. Along the Siegfried Line, Brennan studies the records. He sees signatures at the bottom of each confession. Each one carries not fear, but coherence. The writing is deliberate, controlled. These are not men broken. They are men awakened. Dr. Vogel notes that one officer, formerly an instructor at a Nazi youth academy, now writes essays analyzing the psychological control methods used by the regime. He requested to have his writings shared with post-war authorities, to warn future generations against the manipulation of belief. Brennan can hardly process what he's reading. These transformations, achieved without harm, represent something revolutionary. America has created the first true psychological counterweapon, a means to fight ideology with understanding instead of violence. But as extraordinary as it seems, he knows how fragile it all is. Outside the walls of Camp King, the world believes these scientists are torturers. Even within the Allied ranks, few understand the truth. The program's secrecy protects it, but that same secrecy now feeds the German narrative. To defend its honor, America cannot even reveal its most humane achievement. Brennan walks through the corridors again, this time with new eyes. Every corridor echoes with the hum of thought, rather than pain. Every officer he passes greets him with quiet confidence. They know what they are doing is dangerous, but they believe it's right. Before leaving, he watches one final session through an observation window. The subject, a former SS captain, sits perfectly still. Dr. Vogel places a photograph on the table in front of him, a photo of a family from Warsaw. His eyes tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. For the first time, he sees the consequences of his obedience. The machine beside him records a surge of physiological activity, a collapse of denial, a flicker of conscience. Brennan turns away, shaken. This is not warfare as he once understood it. This is a struggle for the human soul. Later, in his notebook, he writes a line he will never publish. In a war driven by machines, we found our most powerful weapon was truth itself. As he leaves the laboratory, Dr. Vogel calls after him. "You see now why they fear us," she says. "We fight not with cruelty, but with understanding. And nothing frightens tyrants more than that." Brennan nods silently. The meaning of psychological warfare has just changed forever. He now understands why the German propaganda machine had to destroy this place. Not because it was barbaric, but because it was merciful. Because it proved that the human mind could be freed from tyranny without force. And mercy, in times of war, can be more terrifying to an enemy than any weapon ever forged. Major Philip Brennan's investigation takes a sharp turn when he begins to ask the question that everyone at Camp King avoids: how did the photographs leave this place? By now, he has seen the equipment with his own eyes. He knows it is harmless, even humane. But someone, somewhere, captured those images, and somehow they ended up in the hands of Joseph Goebbels. It wasn't espionage, it was something else, something more ordinary, more human. Inside the administrative wing of Camp King, Brennan begins reviewing access logs and photography records. Every image produced in this facility must be logged, filed, and sealed under military supervision. Each session has a corresponding authorization slip, signed by a senior officer. He spends hours flipping through binders until he notices something strange. One name appears repeatedly, but only during a narrow window in November 1944. Private First Class Robert Chen, a military photographer, attached to the Psychological Warfare Division. According to records, Chen had been temporarily assigned to document experimental interrogation procedures for internal study. A few weeks later, he was transferred to a medical transport unit in France. Brennan orders Chen's service file pulled from headquarters. The man's record is spotless, decorated for bravery, with commendations for field documentation. Nothing suggests disloyalty, but one note catches Brennan's attention. Currently hospitalized in Paris due to combat injuries. The next morning, Brennan takes the first available convoy to Paris. The city, though liberated, still bears the scars of occupation. American ambulances crowd the courtyards of makeshift hospitals. Inside one of them, Brennan finds Chen, a thin, pale young man lying in a recovery ward. His arm is bandaged. His expression is distant, almost haunted. Brennan introduces himself as an investigator for Allied Command. When he mentions Camp King, Chen stiffens immediately. His breathing quickens. He looks away, his voice trembling as he admits that he once took photographs there. He says he was ordered to document the sessions. He didn't understand what he was seeing. He recalls dimly lit rooms, officers seated in mechanical chairs, the low hum of machines, the sound of prisoners shouting during what he assumed were interrogations. He wasn't told about the true purpose of the devices. He never saw the scientists' notes, only the faces of the prisoners, pale and exhausted. To him, it looked like torment. When Brennan asks what he did with the negatives, Chen hesitates. His eyes fill with regret. He explains that before being reassigned, he secretly copied several photographs and mailed them to a journalist friend in Switzerland, a man he had known before the war. He believed he was exposing wrongdoing, that he was protecting America's moral reputation by ensuring accountability. The journalist's name, he says, was Felix Brandt, a neutral correspondent based in Zurich who often wrote about wartime ethics. Chen assumed the photographs would prompt an investigation, not a scandal. But within 2 weeks of sending them, he heard the broadcast from Berlin. His own pictures, twisted into proof of atrocities. When he realized what he had done, it broke him. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Soon after, he was wounded during an air raid and sent here. As Brennan listens, a heavy silence fills the room. Chen's voice cracks when he says, "I thought I was doing the right thing." Brennan doesn't respond. He knows that no punishment can equal the man's guilt. The truth is cruel in its irony. An American soldier, acting from conscience, had nearly destroyed the most humane psychological program of the war. Back at headquarters, Brennan reconstructs the chain of events. The photographs left Camp King through ordinary military mail, disguised among personal correspondence. Once in Switzerland, Brandt attempted to verify their authenticity. He reached out to several contacts in Bern, including one who turned out to be an undercover German agent. Within 48 hours, the negatives were in Goebbels's hands. From there, the propaganda machine did the rest. Cropped, darkened, and edited for maximum impact. What had once been scientific instruments now appeared like medieval torture racks. And in the absence of explanation, the world saw what it feared most. Brennan submits his findings in a sealed report. The leak originated from internal misunderstanding, not espionage. The result was a psychological counterstrike of unprecedented reach. But his investigation doesn't end there. He visits the Paris hospital once more before leaving. Chen's condition has worsened. The young man sits quietly by the window, watching snow fall over the city. Brennan doesn't reveal the classified truth about Camp King, but he assures him of one thing, that no one there was ever harmed. That what he saw wasn't torture, but science. Chen's reaction is immediate. His hands tremble. His voice lowers to a whisper. Then the lies. They were built from my truth. Brennan says nothing more. The man's guilt is punishment enough. On his way out, he writes a brief note in his pocket journal. The greatest weapon in psychological warfare is misinterpretation. The irony is unbearable. A single act of misplaced morality, a man's attempt to defend the innocent, nearly destroyed the very program designed to restore innocence to others. When Brennan returns to Allied command, he presents his findings in full. The leak is confirmed, the origin traced, but the damage is already done. Germany's narrative has reached every neutral capital. The world believes what it saw, not what is true. Brennan is granted temporary authority to manage the crisis. He understands the magnitude of his next task. Not only must he prove America's innocence, he must do so without revealing Camp King's existence. The secrecy that protects the program is the same wall that prevents its defense. Before he leaves Paris, Brennan visits the cathedral square near the river. The bells echo faintly across the rooftops. He looks at the people, civilians, soldiers, refugees, all shaped by propaganda in one way or another. It strikes him that this war isn't only fought with bullets, but with beliefs. And beliefs, once wounded, heal slowly. The scandal that began with one photograph now threatens to consume an entire nation's reputation. But Brennan is not finished yet. He has uncovered the truth, and now he must find a way to turn it into America's defense. he knows that the next battle will not be fought on a battlefield. It will be fought in the minds of millions who have already chosen what to believe. By late January 1945, the psychological war is spiraling out of control. The accusations of torture have circled the globe. In London, neutral ambassadors demand answers. In Washington, officials scramble to protect the nation's image. And somewhere between France and Belgium, Major Philip Brennan carries the truth that no one can ever fully reveal. He has proof the photographs were real, but not what they seemed. He knows the story began with one frightened soldier and a misunderstanding. Yet the truth, however clear, is useless if it can't be told. Camp King's very existence is still a state secret, buried beneath layers of classification. The world is condemning something it can never be allowed to see. For Brennan, it's a nightmare of paradoxes. He's the man who solved the mystery, but he cannot speak. Every possible solution threatens something greater. If he exposes Camp King, he saves America's reputation, but destroys a program that could shorten the war. If he hides it, the propaganda lives on, and every captured American prisoner suffers the consequences. Inside the Allied command post at Reims, the air feels thick with tension. Meetings drag late into the night. Reports pour in from the front. German broadcasts now quote the American confession fabricated by Berlin. Prisoner exchanges have halted. Even neutral journalists have turned skeptical. Brennan stands before the intelligence board, exhausted. His final recommendation is simple: fight lies with confusion. If they cannot tell the truth, they can at least make the falsehood collapse under its own weight. He outlines a plan. Allow neutral Red Cross inspectors full access to ordinary POW camps, places where treatment is humane and transparent. Let them publish their findings. Simultaneously, release carefully curated documents suggesting that the mysterious photographs might not even show an Allied site. Hint that the equipment could belong to a captured German facility. Create doubt, not denial. The officials exchange glances. It's bold, but it might work. Within 48 hours, Brennan's strategy begins. Allied intelligence crafts reports, printed on neutral paper, suggesting that similar apparatus existed in German experimental laboratories. A few old photographs of captured facilities are quietly circulated through Swedish newspapers. The message is subtle but powerful. Maybe the propaganda machine confused its own reflection. Then comes the counterstroke. American broadcasters release statements questioning how Germany could possibly obtain photographs from an Allied compound so deep behind enemy lines. The contradictions begin to mount. Neutral journalists start asking new questions, not about American cruelty, but about German credibility. The tide of perception starts to shift. Meanwhile, Brennan continues to work from the shadows, reviewing every publication, coordinating quiet leaks, adjusting timing like a chess player, setting traps for an unseen opponent. Each night, he studies the propaganda reports from Berlin, tracking the psychological duel word by word. But in the middle of this intellectual battle, tragedy strikes. A coded dispatch arrives from Switzerland. An intelligence source reports that Lieutenant Gerald Brennan, captured months earlier, has died in German custody. The date: January 12, 1945. The reason, though vague, is unmistakable. Prison conditions deteriorated sharply after the torture scandal erupted. German guards, convinced of American brutality, tightened discipline. Gerald was one of the casualties of that tightening. For several minutes, Brennan sits motionless at his desk. His brother's face drifts through his memory. His grin before deployment, the half-finished letter he never mailed. The realization hits him like a quiet collapse. The very propaganda he's fighting has already claimed his own blood. That night, he walks through the empty corridors of the intelligence building. Papers rustle faintly in the dark. The war outside feels far away. Inside, he feels hollow, caught between duty and grief. The next morning, he returns to Camp King one final time. The facility looks unchanged, but everything inside him has shifted. He finds Dr. Vogel in the assessment chamber, working with a new prisoner, a young German officer who sits across from her, eyes distant, hands trembling. Through the glass, Brennan watches the session unfold. Vogel speaks calmly, showing the man documents, photographs of concentration camps, maps of destroyed villages, testimonies from survivors. The officer shakes his head at first, denying, deflecting. But then his expression changes. His voice falters. He begins to whisper names, friends, towns, orders he followed. Each word erodes a layer of his defense. The machine beside him records his heartbeat climbing, then slowing. Brennan realizes he's witnessing redemption, not interrogation. A mind learning to face truth for the first time. When the session ends, Dr. Vogel notices him standing at the window. She walks over, her eyes soft but resolute. "You see," she says quietly, "truth has its own rhythm. You can't force it. It must arrive on its own terms." Brennan nods, barely able to speak. The work she's doing here, the thing the world calls torture, is the very essence of what his brother fought for. The idea that even in war, conscience matters. He leaves Camp King without ceremony. No farewell, no salute. Just silence. Back in Reims, his counteroffensive unfolds like clockwork. Neutral inspectors report humane conditions in Allied camps. German propaganda struggles to maintain coherence. Contradictions spread within their own press. Some neutral newspapers begin retracting earlier headlines. The scandal that once ignited outrage now starts to dissolve into confusion. Still, victory feels hollow. Late one evening, Brennan sits alone reviewing intelligence updates. A message arrives from a colleague in Stockholm. Berlin press retracting initial claims. Sources conflicted. Narrative collapsing. He closes his eyes. The mission is complete. The accusations will fade. The outrage will quiet. America's image will survive. Yet the cost is unspoken. His brother, lost to the very lie he destroyed. In his private notebook, he writes his final entry on the case. Truth wins wars, but never without casualties. Sometimes, the price of honesty is silence. In the weeks that follow, Camp King continues its secret work. The officers there will deprogram 27 Nazi prisoners before the war ends, each one leaving behind the armor of ideology. None of them will ever know that outside their walls, their salvation nearly became America's shame. Brennan never speaks of the case again. His report is sealed, his findings classified. Officially, the scandal ends as it began, in mystery. But among those who fought it, there is quiet understanding. The war of propaganda has proven one thing beyond doubt. Truth is the most dangerous weapon of all. For Germany, lies became a shield. For America, silence became a strategy. And for Philip Brennan, the line between the two will haunt him for the rest of his life. February 1945. Europe is still burning. But for Major Philip Brennan, the battlefield has shifted entirely. The tanks and rifles are far away. His war now lives inside words, headlines, and whispers. A quiet struggle to control what people believe. After weeks of counter-propaganda, the tide is beginning to turn. The German narrative that once dominated neutral newspapers is now tangled in contradictions. Some editors in Sweden and Switzerland are retracting their early reports. Others quietly admit that the photographs may have been misinterpreted. Still, the story refuses to die completely. A single spark of doubt remains, and Berlin keeps fanning it. Brennan needs something decisive, something that will not just silence the lie, but shatter it. The answer arrives from an unexpected source. One evening, a message reaches him through a secure courier from Camp King. It bears only a few words. Adler volunteers. Hauptmann Friedrich Adler. A name Brennan recognizes from Dr. Vogel's progress reports. Former intelligence officer in the Wehrmacht, captured during the Ardennes campaign. One of the first subjects to complete the full deprogramming process. Brennan remembers the note beside his file. Recovered empathy, cooperative, morally lucid. Adler has spent months undergoing psychological rehabilitation at Camp King, stripped of his indoctrination layer by layer. Now, he wants to help destroy the propaganda that once enslaved his own countrymen. When Brennan meets him in person, he's struck by how ordinary the man looks. The rigid arrogance of the Nazi officer is gone. His posture is calm, almost humble. His English is soft, deliberate. "If my country is to end," Adler says quietly, "let it end knowing truth." Dr. Vogel explains the plan she and Adler have devised, a plan so dangerous that it borders on impossible. Adler will be returned to Germany through neutral channels, posing as an escaped prisoner. Once back within German lines, he will spread a fabricated story that undermines the credibility of Goebbels's entire narrative. He will claim that the photographs of the supposed torture devices were actually created inside Germany itself, part of a secret power struggle between the SS and regular Wehrmacht intelligence. He will suggest that the images were forged by hardline factions trying to frame moderate officers for treason. If the story takes root, it will sow confusion inside the Reich's propaganda machine. It's psychological warfare at its purest, using the enemy's own tools against them. But Brennan hesitates. If Adler is discovered, the consequences will be immediate and fatal. The Gestapo will brand him a traitor. He'll vanish without a trace. Dr. Vogel meets Brennan's gaze. "He knows," she says softly. He insists. For Adler, it's not about survival. It's about redemption. He tells Brennan, "I once believed I was serving truth. Now I understand I was serving blindness. Let me end it with my eyes open." The plan moves forward under extreme secrecy. Through the Swiss Red Cross, Adler's transfer is arranged as part of a staged prisoner exchange. The paperwork lists him as a wounded officer returned for medical reasons. Only 4 people know the real mission: Brennan, Dr. Vogel, Dr. Fitch, and the Red Cross intermediary. 2 nights before departure, Adler leaves a handwritten note for Brennan. It reads, "You showed me mercy. Now, let me show my people what mercy truly means." When he crosses the Swiss border, he vanishes into history. Weeks pass with no word. The Allies advance deeper into Germany, and the world's attention shifts to the collapsing front. But inside the corridors of Allied intelligence, Brennan waits for any sign that Adler succeeded. Then, one morning, the first reports arrive. Swiss newspapers publish conflicting stories citing anonymous German sources, claiming that the torture photographs were part of an internal power feud. A week later, German broadcasts begin hinting at possible irregularities in the original evidence. Within 3 weeks, the entire narrative begins to eat itself. Goebbels's ministry suddenly halts all mention of the scandal. Propaganda outlets receive new instructions to redirect public focus to battlefield heroism. The accusations vanish from German radio as abruptly as they appeared. Brennan reads every report in silence. The results are undeniable. Adler's story worked. Through his deception, he has turned one of the regime's most effective propaganda victories into a self-inflicted wound. Goebbels' network, built on total control of information, now questions its own reliability. The idea of the infallible Nazi narrative is fractured. For the first time, psychological warfare has outmatched propaganda. In his private notes, Brennan writes, "Truth disguised as deception can sometimes free more minds than truth spoken openly. But even in triumph, the cost weighs heavily." Brennan knows Adler can never return. If the Gestapo discovers the ruse, they will erase him completely. Dr. Vogel receives a final message smuggled through Swiss channels. A single line written in Adler's handwriting. "The truth is spreading." After that, nothing more. For Brennan, the silence says everything. Adler's sacrifice reminds him of his brother. Both men lost to the same invisible war. One to lies, one to the act of undoing them. The symmetry is haunting. He visits Dr. Vogel before leaving Camp King for the last time. She stands by the observation window, watching a new session unfold. Another captured officer, another attempt at awakening. Brennan asks her if she ever feels haunted by what they do here. She pauses, then answers, "Every day." But fear is not the enemy of truth. It's the shadow that tells us where light should fall. He carries those words with him as he departs. Outside, the war rages on, but the tide is changing. Allied forces are closing in on the Rhine. The world will soon know victory. Yet Brennan understands that this hidden battle, the one fought in the mind, will never make the history books. A man redeemed in secrecy, a scandal undone by deception, a victory achieved through mercy. Weeks later, as Berlin prepares for its final collapse, Allied intelligence confirms what Brennan already knows. The torture accusations have vanished entirely from German propaganda. Goebbels' ministry has moved on to new lies, leaving behind the ghost of one it could not control. For Major Philip Brennan, it's a quiet triumph, but it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like balance restored at a price that can never be repaid. He closes his final report with one line: "The enemy taught us how to lie. We taught ourselves how to tell the truth in disguise." It's the last entry in the file before Camp King disappears once again into secrecy. March 1945. The accusations that once thundered across Europe fade almost overnight. Berlin's radio no longer speaks of American torturers. The newspapers that once shouted about medieval chambers now print stories of retreat, shortages, and the approaching Allied armies. The scandal that nearly shattered America's moral standing dissolves into the static of a collapsing regime. For Major Philip Brennan, the quiet feels unnatural. Silence, after all, can be louder than any headline. He knows the propaganda didn't vanish. It was buried, smothered by confusion and the shifting tides of war. But buried lies have a way of leaving echoes. Within the Allied command, the official narrative is simple. The photographs were falsified. The accusations unsubstantiated. The case closed. Yet, those who truly know the story, only a handful of officers scattered across Europe, understand that the truth is far stranger. Camp King continues its operations behind sealed gates. No flags, no insignia, no acknowledgement. Its staff work tirelessly through the final months of the war, refining their methods, quietly dismantling the psychological armor of captured Nazi officers. The results are astonishing. By May, 27 high-ranking prisoners have undergone the full deconditioning process. Among them are SS strategists, field commanders, and political officers once devoted to the Reich. Each emerges changed, some disoriented, some deeply remorseful, others ready to assist the Allies. From their testimonies come valuable intelligence, defense blueprints for German fortifications, the timing of troop withdrawals, and details of underground resistance groups forming against the Nazi Party itself. Information that saves thousands of Allied lives. Dr. Vogel and Dr. Fitch record everything, yet their reports remain sealed. Each document bears the same red stamp: top secret, psychological operations, experimental. The scientists never seek recognition, nor are they likely to receive it. Their work is too unusual, too controversial to fit within the clean image of wartime heroism. For Brennan, the closure feels incomplete. He files his final investigation report to Allied command. Over 400 pages of evidence proving that the so-called torture photographs were the result of misunderstanding, not malice. His findings are immediately classified. He signs a confidentiality agreement that binds him to silence for life. And so, just like that, the story disappears. Publicly, the torture scandal becomes a footnote, erased from memory. No press release ever clarifies what really happened. No journalist uncovers the truth. The accusation that once shook continents fades into rumor, then rumor into myth. But, within the archives of the Allied command, a different story lives on. A secret record of how America used psychology not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of redemption. In April, As Allied troops cross the Rhine and Germany collapses, Brennan visits Camp King one final time. The compound looks as it always has, gray, quiet, unmarked. Dr. Vogel meets him in the corridor, her face weary but serene. She tells him that the last of their subjects has renounced his allegiance to the Reich and has begun assisting in humanitarian outreach to displaced civilians. Her voice carries no triumph, only relief. They were not monsters, she says softly, just men who forgot how to think. Brennan looks through the observation glass one last time. A German prisoner, once an ardent believer in the Nazi cause, now reads from a book of philosophy in halting English. He is free, though still behind walls. The war inside him is finally over. As Brennan leaves the camp, snow begins to melt across Belgium. The roads are littered with the remnants of a dying war, burned vehicles, abandoned helmets, shattered maps. Yet behind him, within that unmarked compound, a quiet revolution has taken place, one that no one will ever know about. In the weeks that follow, Camp King's files are sealed under new classifications. Only a few officers are authorized to read them. Dr. Fitch and Dr. Vogel are instructed to destroy their research notes after the war. They comply, reluctantly. The world, it seems, is not ready for a story about mercy in the middle of a war defined by destruction. When the surrender finally comes in May, Camp King's gates close without ceremony. The soldiers who guarded it are reassigned. The scientists return to civilian life. To the world outside, the facility never existed. Years later, when government archivists begin cataloging post-war intelligence projects, Camp King's name appears only once, buried in a logistics memo under a harmless label: Enhanced Interrogation Facility. Closed 1945. The irony of that description will echo through future decades, misunderstood by generations who will never know what it truly meant. For Brennan, the silence becomes its own form of burden. He returns to his unit headquarters, writes his final debrief, and boards a transport back to the United States. The war, at least officially, is over. But he knows that wars of truth never really end. They simply go unspoken. He carries home a medal, 2 notebooks, and a grief that words can't measure. He has won the invisible battle, but at the cost of his brother, his peace, and the chance to ever explain what truly happened. Years later, when the war is long behind him, those who knew Brennan will describe him as a man who understood too much. He never sought fame or recognition. In lectures and writings, he never once mentions the name Camp King. Yet every so often, he speaks vaguely about a time when mercy became the most powerful weapon in the world. Those who listen don't fully understand, but he smiles faintly each time, as if remembering something sacred and secret. The world moves on. The propaganda war ends not with victory parades, but with silence. A silence that conceals a remarkable truth: that America, in its darkest hour, discovered a way to defeat tyranny not through domination, but through understanding. It is a story that will remain buried for decades, until the day history finally rediscovers the place called Camp King. When the war ends, Europe exhales. Cities are liberated, flags are raised, and the victors celebrate. But for Major Philip Brennan, the end of war brings no peace, only silence that grows heavier with each passing year. He returns to New York in late 1945, wearing the same uniform that once carried purpose. But now, the medals on his chest feel like decorations for ghosts. His name appears nowhere in public records, and his most important work remains locked inside classified archives. In official documents, he is simply listed as consultant, psychological operations. No mention of Camp King. No mention of the propaganda crisis that nearly destroyed Allied credibility. No hint of the secret that changed the course of psychological warfare. He resumes teaching at Columbia University, the same halls where he once lectured about the mind's ability to resist fear. Students see him as composed, distant, perhaps a bit weary. No one suspects that their quiet professor once fought an invisible battle for the soul of a nation. But inside, the weight never lifts. Brennan keeps a small notebook locked in his desk drawer. Its pages are filled with coded reflections and sketches of machines he cannot name. He writes about Dr. Vogel's theories on moral rehabilitation, about Adler's sacrifice, and about his brother, Gerald, whose death he can never separate from the lies he worked to destroy. He writes not for others, but for himself, because he knows that someday truth will need witnesses. In the early years of the Cold War, Brennan watches as the world enters a new age of paranoia. Intelligence agencies multiply. Psychological operations expand into darker experiments. He reads about secret programs using coercive methods, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and chemical trials. They claim to fight ideology through control, not understanding. Each new revelation cuts him deeper. He knows where those ideas began, born from the misinterpretation of Camp King's mission. A facility built on empathy has become the seed for manipulation. What was once designed to restore humanity is being turned into its opposite. Brennan writes in his notebook, "We proved that the mind could be freed. Yet, the lesson learned was that it could be captured." He begins keeping detailed notes on the progression of these post-war intelligence projects. Files marked confidential disappear from university mailrooms and reappear in his personal archive. He never speaks of how he obtains them. Some colleagues whisper that he has friends in government who still owe him favors. For nearly 2 decades, he watches the rise of a new kind of psychological warfare, one that twists truth rather than liberates it. He sees the same pattern that once fueled Goebbels's lies now mirrored in propaganda from every side. Truth has become elastic again, stretched by ideology and fear. It haunts him. In private correspondence with Dr. Vogel, now living quietly in Zurich, he writes, "We built something good, and then buried it. The grave became fertile ground for distortion." She replies only once, "All science risks corruption, but mercy never truly dies, Philip. It just waits to be remembered." The years pass. Brennan grows older, more withdrawn. His lectures turn introspective. Students say he has the habit of pausing mid-sentence, as if recalling something he cannot say aloud. In 1983, at age 81, Major Philip Brennan passes away quietly in his home. No ceremony, no obituaries beyond the local paper. The cause of death? Heart failure. The contents of his office? Hundreds of pages of research notes, photographs, and private reflections are sealed in a university archive at his request, not to be opened for 12 years. When the box is finally unsealed in 1995, researchers are stunned. Inside are detailed accounts of Camp King's psychological rehabilitation program, transcripts of interrogations, and diagrams of the misunderstood torture equipment. Tucked among them is a letter written in Brennan's careful handwriting. The truth was never hidden to protect the guilty. It was hidden to protect the idea that mercy could exist even in war. If these papers are read, let them stand as proof that understanding is stronger than fear. The revelation changes how historians view Allied intelligence. What had once been rumored as an interrogation center is revealed to have been the world's first experiment in deprogramming ideological extremism. But the discovery comes too late for its creators. Dr. Fitch and Dr. Vogel are long gone. Their names never entered the history books. Adler's fate remains unknown, and Brennan, the man who fought both lies and silence, never lived to see his truth restored. Yet his notebooks speak louder than any speech could. They tell of a war fought not for territory, but for the integrity of the human mind. They tell of a man who understood too well that history remembers the loudest voices, not the truest ones. In the end, Philip Brennan was both victor and casualty of the same invisible conflict. He proved that psychological warfare could be humane, and watched the world forget. His life's greatest work remained a secret, too noble to survive the politics of war.